RAF Station Marham. Winter 1943. The night air is sharp, edged with frost and the distant hum of Merlins winding down after another bombing run. Beneath the yellow glow of a single floodlight, a mechanic in oil-stained overalls stands motionless beside a de Havilland Mosquito, its wooden skin glistening with dew. Steam curls from the twin exhausts as he listens, every vibration, every metallic click, telling a secret only he understands. The air smells of burnt fuel and cold grass. A pilot walks past, nodding, unaware that inside those engines beats a forbidden rhythm. A change so small it shouldn't matter, yet it will. The mechanic wipes his hands, glances around to ensure no officer is watching, and makes a final, precise adjustment. The throttle responds with a sharper growl, a whisper of untamed power. Within days, the Mosquitoes from this base will begin to vanish from German gun sights, streaking faster than any fighter in pursuit. And it all began with that quiet act, on a frozen English night. In 1940, Britain stood alone. The Luftwaffe's bombers had scoured London's skies, and the Royal Air Force, though victorious in the Battle of Britain, was stretched thin. Its airfields cratered, its factories under constant threat. The RAF needed aircraft that could outthink, outfly, and outlast the enemy. But production lines were running dry, and aluminium was as precious as gold. From this scarcity emerged an idea that many senior officers dismissed as absurd: a bomber built mostly of wood. Geoffrey de Havilland, an engineer with a vision sharper than any blade, believed speed itself could be armor. If an aircraft could fly higher and faster than enemy fighters, it wouldn't need turrets or gunners, only precision, lightness, and the will to push beyond convention. The result was the de Havilland DH-98 Mosquito. Two sleek Merlin engines bolted to a wooden frame of birch and balsa, assembled not in great factories but in furniture workshops and carpentry sheds scattered across Britain. It was faster than the Spitfire at altitude and could carry a 4,000-pound bomb load across Europe. By 1942, it became the RAF's most versatile weapon: a bomber, a pathfinder, a reconnaissance machine, and later, a night fighter. But behind its elegance lay industrial strain. Rolls-Royce, already producing engines for Hurricanes, Spitfires, and Lancasters, struggled to keep pace with demand. Each Merlin engine was a masterpiece of metallurgy. 12 cylinders, liquid-cooled, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Field repairs were difficult, spare parts scarcer still. Mechanics worked through freezing nights, swapping cracked pistons, replacing carburetors, tuning boost pressures by feel and sound rather than instruments. The push for performance was relentless. Every squadron wanted more power. Every pilot wanted more speed. Yet official manuals drew hard limits. Manifold pressure not to exceed safe ratings. Boost restricted by order of command. Beyond that line lay danger, detonation, engine failure, or court-martial. Still, rumors drifted through the hangars. Some said a few crews had tuned their Merlins differently, shaving seconds off climb times, gaining miles per hour over the channel. Commanders ignored it, as long as results improved. By late 1942, the Mosquito had proven itself indispensable. But it was operating at the edge of its design, with enemy fighters faster, radar improving, and losses beginning to climb. The pressure on crews and ground teams grew immense. Somewhere amid this tension, a single mechanic, unnamed in reports, remembered only through whispers, decided that the rules could be bent one last time. By early 1943, the Mosquito had become the RAF's most prized asset: sleek, fast, and astonishingly adaptable. From low-level strikes over Norway's fjords to precision raids on Gestapo headquarters in France and Holland, it proved what de Havilland had promised. Speed was indeed armor. Yet that armor was thinning. The Luftwaffe was learning. Messerschmitt Bf 109Gs and Focke-Wulf FW 190DAs now patrolled higher and faster than before, often guided by radar to intercept Mosquito paths. Every new German engine upgrade narrowed the margin that once kept the Mosquito safe. RAF Bomber Command depended on these wooden wonders not only for raids, but also for night reconnaissance and target marking. Missions that brought them directly into the web of German air defenses. Crews knew they were racing against evolution itself. The Mosquito's twin Merlins could propel it past 300 Mbit, but interception reports showed enemy fighters closing in within seconds during pursuit. In a war measured by minutes and altitude, the difference between life and death might come from a few extra knots of speed, or a few forbidden turns of a wrench. On the ground, those wrenches worked tirelessly. RAF maintenance culture in wartime Britain was a blend of precision engineering and improvisation. Supply shortages meant spare parts were often scavenged, repaired, or even fabricated from scrap. Engine components were overhauled on muddy airstrips. Cooling systems patched with adhesive and wire. Mechanics became craftsmen, medics, and gamblers, keeping machines alive that should, by logic, have failed weeks earlier. Official regulations forbade unauthorized modifications. Engine boost levels, carburetor settings, and supercharger timing were tightly controlled by Air Ministry orders. Yet field conditions ignored bureaucracy. The men who kept the Merlins roaring faced brutal winter nights, endless sorties, and the knowledge that one misfire could mean a pilot's death. In that crucible, necessity turned to daring. Whispers spread between squadrons of mechanics who tweaked boost controls beyond factory limits, adjusting supercharger ratios or enriching fuel mixtures for a burst of impossible speed. It was dangerous, unsanctioned, but sometimes it worked. And in one squadron operating from England's eastern coast, a base shrouded in fog and secrecy, one such mechanic went further than anyone else. His hands, guided by instinct more than instruction, altered the Merlins in a way no manual had described. The change would push the Mosquito's engines beyond their rated limits. And soon, the Luftwaffe would discover that their fastest fighters could no longer catch the wooden ghost. He had no name in the reports, just a service number, and the trade classification Fitter zur E. A quiet man from Coventry, once a furniture apprentice before the war, turned his tools from oak to aluminium and steel. His hands, calloused and deliberate, carried a memory of craft that the RAF could never train. The feel of tension in a bolt, the sound of a bearing under strain. To him, an engine wasn't machinery. It was music, and he could hear when it was out of tune. The war gave men like him little room for error. Every sortie depended on their precision, yet their world existed in the shadows of hangars, never the headlines. The mechanic's risk calculus was simple. If pushing the Merlin a little harder brought one more crew home, the risk was worth the reprimand. He wasn't reckless. He was methodical, listening, testing, trusting instinct over regulation. Squadron leadership walked a finer line. Officially, they were bound by Air Ministry orders. Unauthorized modifications could mean dismissal or worse. But war erodes rules. When crews began returning faster, with fewer losses, most commanders didn't ask questions. They knew better than to look too closely at what was happening under the cowlings. The commanding officer of that Mosquito unit would later write in his logbook, "Engine performance markedly improved. Must commend maintenance section." That was all the recognition the mechanic ever received. For the air crews, the difference was visceral. Pilots described the Mosquito as alive, a machine that breathed with them. After the modification, the throttle felt sharper, the climb steeper, the speed unearthly. Navigators saw German tracers fall behind sooner than before. Radar locks breaking off mid-chase. They couldn't explain it, but they trusted the hands that made it happen. On the ground, word spread fast. Other mechanics came by under the pretext of borrowing tools, watching, learning. Morale shifted, not from speeches or medals, but from the whisper that someone had found a way to fight back with ingenuity, alone. In the grinding fatigue of endless sorties, that spark of hope was priceless. The forbidden trick was deceptively simple: a recalibration of the Merlin's boost control and fuel mixture that allowed the engine to deliver higher manifold pressure for short bursts. Normally, the RAF capped the boost at plus 118 psi to preserve engine life. But by slightly altering the supercharger's wastegate linkage and adjusting the carburetor's automatic boost control spring tension, the mechanic allowed a surge closer to plus 21 or even plus 22. It was a dangerous margin. One misstep could detonate a cylinder or melt a piston crown. But under his care, the engines held. He had found the balance between risk and power. The Merlins, fed with 100-octane fuel and tuned beyond their official settings, now roared with an urgency few had ever heard. At takeoff, pilots noticed the difference instantly. The tail lifted faster, acceleration sharper. In level flight, the Mosquito gained as much as 20 miles per hour. Against German radar-controlled intercepts, that was the difference between being caught and vanishing into the clouds. Tactically, this minor miracle changed everything. The Mosquito could now strike deeper into occupied Europe. Berlin, Hamburg, Copenhagen, and still outrun pursuit. Luftwaffe controllers struggled to vector their fighters fast enough. By the time a Mosquito appeared on radar, it was already gone. Mission timings tightened. Losses dropped. Bomber Command realized it could rely on the Mosquito to perform daylight raids that even Spitfires struggled to protect. Crews began calling their aircraft the Ghost, untouchable, unseen, unstoppable. For the Luftwaffe, frustration turned to disbelief. The Bf-109G6 and FW-190A5, Germany's best interceptors, could barely close the gap. Reports from JG-26 and JG-2 units described Mosquitoes escaping at full throttle, their speed unmatched. Pilots accused their radar operators of errors. Engineers accused intelligence of underestimating the British engines. None realized the secret wasn't in new technology. It was in one man's willingness to defy the manual. German intelligence investigated the sudden rise in Mosquito performance, suspecting a new engine variant or fuel blend. But there was nothing to find. The modification existed only in the minds and hands of a few ground crew who had learned it quietly, shared it quietly, and never wrote it down. The Mosquito had become a legend, not through a design office in Hatfield, but through the courage of men on the flight line. And soon, that legend would be tested in the skies above Berlin on a mission where every extra knot of speed meant survival. Berlin, January 30th, 1943. The city prepared for a grand broadcast, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power. Loudspeakers lined Unter den Linden, banners draped over government buildings, and across Europe, radios waited for his voice. But high above the clouds over England, a very different kind of message was being prepared. At RAF Marham, crews of No. 105 and No. 139 Squadron gathered around their Mosquitoes. Fast, unarmored and carrying 4 500-pound bombs apiece. Their mission? Strike the Reich Chancellery in Berlin at the exact moment Hitler's speech was to begin, disrupting it before millions of listeners. It would be the longest daylight raid yet, attempted by a twin-engine aircraft, deep into defended territory. Among the ground crews working that morning was the same unnamed mechanic. He had spent the previous night rechecking his adjustments, rebalancing boost controls by lamplight. Pilots trusted his touch. Now, his work would face its ultimate test. At 11:00 a.m., the first Mosquitoes roared down the runway. Their engines, freshly tuned, responded with a sharper resonance, climbing faster than any of the crews had experienced before. Over the North Sea, they leveled out at 25,000 feet, throttles steady at maximum continuous power. Their speed, nearly 390 miles per hour. German radar detected the intruders near the Dutch coast. Die 190s of Jagdgeschwader 26 were scrambled from Gilseriehen and Woensdrecht. Controllers plotted intercept vectors, but by the time fighters reached altitude, the British bombers had already slipped past. The Mosquitoes raced across northern Germany, threading through cloud banks and flak bursts. At 11:29 a.m., just as Hitler's broadcast was to begin, the first bombs fell on Berlin. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire too late. The Chancellery was struck. The radio transmission cut out mid-sentence. Within minutes, the Mosquitoes turned west for the long flight home. Over the Zuider Zee, FW-190s finally caught sight of them. But closing the gap proved impossible. Pilots reported the British aircraft accelerating beyond expectation. The modified Merlins screamed at near-limit boost, temperatures climbing, but the engines held. By the time the Luftwaffe gave up the chase, the Mosquitoes were already over the North Sea, descending into cloud. When they landed, the engines ticked and hissed as they cooled. Mechanics gathered silently around the aircraft, knowing what had just been proven. The forbidden adjustment had carried the Mosquito farther, faster and safer than ever before. That single raid, brief, precise, and devastating, marked the moment when speed itself became Britain's sharpest weapon. News of the Berlin raid spread through the RAF like wildfire. For the first time, a handful of unescorted Mosquitoes had flown to the heart of Nazi Germany in broad daylight, and returned without a single loss. The achievement astonished both command and enemy intelligence. For Bomber Command, it was living proof that precision and speed could triumph where mass formations and armor had failed. Within 24 hours, after-action reports arrived at High Wycombe, detailing performance figures that stunned analysts. Pilots of No. 105 and No. 139 Squadron recorded sustained cruise speeds of nearly 390-400 mph, exceeding official specifications by over 15 feet in Tarov. Engineers at de Havilland were perplexed. No recent factory modifications could explain such performance. Quietly, squadron maintenance officers were asked for clarification. Most offered only vague explanations. Engines in excellent tune, well-serviced aircraft. None mentioned the truth. The Luftwaffe's reaction was immediate and furious. Berlin's anti-aircraft command demanded explanations for how a few wooden aircraft could reach the capital unchallenged. Jagdgeschwader 26 pilots, humiliated, filed reports describing Mosquitoes they could not catch even in shallow dives. One German officer wrote bitterly that the enemy aircraft climbed as though pulled by invisible ropes. Inside the RAF, strategic consequences rippled outward. Air Vice Marshal Sir Basil Embry, head of the Mosquito Strike Wing, pressed for expanded daylight operations. The Berlin success, he argued, showed that speed could now substitute for protection. Within weeks, the Mosquito was tasked with deep penetration raids on Gestapo headquarters, communication hubs, and rail depots, missions once deemed suicidal. At the squadron level, morale soared. Pilots spoke of their aircraft as living entities. "She feels freer," one navigator remarked in his diary. Ground crews worked with renewed pride, though the secret of the boost tweak remained unspoken outside their circle. They knew the engines ran hotter, that pistons wore faster, that the price of their advantage was maintenance time. But none cared. Every sortie completed without losses justified the gamble. At higher command, whispers of irregular engine performance reached Rolls-Royce inspectors. A few engineers suspected unauthorized boost alterations, but chose not to press the issue. The RAF needed results, and the Mosquito was delivering them in ways no rulebook had predicted. Soon, other squadrons quietly adopted similar field calibrations. The practice spread not through orders, but through word of mouth. One mechanic teaching another, one unit learning from the next. No one documented it, yet within months, the average speed of operational Mosquitoes had risen across the board. It was the beginning of a new doctrine, one built not in laboratories or headquarters, but in the frozen hangars of Britain, where one act of quiet defiance had redrawn the limits of flight. The weeks following the Berlin raid revealed just how profound the Mosquito's transformation had been. Operational records from February to May 1943 showed a striking pattern. Sortie success rates climbed sharply, and losses fell to less than 1 aircraft per 100 missions, a figure unmatched by any other bomber in the war. The Mosquito's speed made it nearly immune to interception, allowing it to strike targets that had once seemed untouchable. But this victory carried a hidden cost. Maintenance reports began noting premature wear on engine components, burned valves, cracked cylinder heads, and warped pistons. At No. 105 Squadron, a quarter of the Merlin engines required overhaul within 50 flying hours, far below the standard 100-hour service life. Mechanics compensated by rotating engines more frequently, scavenging spare parts from damaged airframes, and working endless night shifts to keep the aircraft operational. In RAF maintenance command memos, officers debated the anomaly. Some reports hinted delicately at unofficial tuning practices or unapproved boost pressures, though none directly accused any squadron of violations. A technical inspection team from Rolls-Royce visited Marham in March 1943, finding nothing conclusive. Engines were performing beyond specification, but safely, at least by wartime standards. The logistical strain was immense. Rolls-Royce factories at Crewe and Derby ramped up Merlin production, while de Havilland accelerated deliveries of replacement parts. The RAF supply network struggled to keep up, diverting spares from other units to Mosquito squadrons. Still, no one dared slow the momentum. Every commander knew what the aircraft were achieving in the field, and that the secret behind their success was best left unexamined. For the ground crews, the toll was personal. Mechanics carried the burden of their creation, knowing each extra knot of speed extracted a physical price from the engines they loved. Yet, the sight of returning bombers, free of bullet holes, made every sleepless night worthwhile. By mid-1943, the Mosquito's engine mystery had become an open secret within the RAF. The practice spread quietly through operational wings, sometimes refined, sometimes exaggerated, but always with the same intent: to push the boundaries of speed without breaking them. The Air Ministry never issued an official directive acknowledging it. But deep in the paperwork, the phrase "performance beyond factory tolerances, satisfactory results maintained" appeared with growing frequency. Bureaucratic code for silent approval. The mechanic's forbidden trick had become, in effect, RAF policy, just not on paper. By the summer of 1943, the ripple effects of the Mosquito's newfound edge extended far beyond any single squadron or airfield. What had begun as a mechanic's quiet modification now shaped the air war's rhythm, strategy, and psychology on both sides of the Channel. The Luftwaffe's high command, already strained by defending Germany's skies from RAF heavies and the growing U.S. daylight offensive, was baffled. Their reports spoke of uninterceptable bombers, aircraft that appeared over Berlin or Hamburg with no warning and vanished into cloud banks before fighters could climb to altitude. The Mosquito's true speed, now exceeding 370 mph at low level, rendered many German defenses obsolete. Radar operators struggled to track them. FW-190 pilots described them as ghosts of the sky. In response, the Luftwaffe diverted scarce resources to counter them, assigning night fighter units with modified Ju-88s and Bf-110s, experimenting with forward radar installations, and even ordering the Me-262's development to accelerate. Every diversion, every shift in allocation weakened their capacity to counter the larger Allied bombing campaign. In that sense, one mechanic's innovation indirectly shaped Germany's strategic miscalculations. For the RAF, the moral landscape was equally complex. Officially, the boost modification didn't exist, yet its results were undeniable. Fewer losses, sharper strikes, and a growing mythology surrounding the Mosquito as the plane the Germans couldn't catch. Propaganda units seized on that image, producing posters and newsreels that turned the aircraft into a symbol of British ingenuity and resilience. Within the ranks, pride mixed with quiet unease. Mechanics and pilots knew the trick's origins, an act that had defied regulations, warranty limits, and common sense. The RAF's strict engineering ethos was built on order and procedure, yet its greatest tactical leap had come from deliberate rule-breaking. Squadron diaries capture this tension, admiration for the daring that saved lives, but also discomfort at how deeply improvisation had seeped into doctrine. The Air Ministry's post-war assessments never named the individual responsible, though archival notes suggest that senior technical officers were aware. One memorandum from late 1944, marked restricted, acknowledges field-initiated tuning adjustments resulting in exceptional performance in certain de Havilland units, followed by a single phrase, "No disciplinary action recommended." History would smooth the edges of the story, celebrating the Mosquito's brilliance while leaving its quiet rebellion untold. Yet among those who worked on its engines, there remained an unspoken truth. Victory had not only been engineered in factories and offices, but forged, wrench, by the hands of men who dared to push the limits. In every war, technology evolves under pressure. But it's human intuition that often makes the leap forward. The Mosquito's brilliance was not only in its design, but in the minds and hands that kept it flying beyond its limits. That unnamed mechanic, working quietly in the cold, surrounded by the thunder of engines and the weight of secrecy, embodied something that no blueprint could capture: the courage to trust craft over caution. His forbidden adjustment was never written into official manuals, yet its echo rippled through the air war. Pilots who once feared interception began to trust their machines again. Missions grew bolder, and behind every successful sortie, there was the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had dared to push past the edge of regulation in pursuit of survival. After the war, engineers would codify what that mechanic had discovered by instinct. Boost limits rose. Engine tolerances improved. The line between improvisation and innovation blurred, and warfare itself became faster, leaner, more dependent on the unseen genius of those on the ground. In the end, history remembers the aces and the aircraft, but sometimes it turns on the quiet defiance of one mechanic, who looked at a rule meant to limit him and chose instead to make history run a little faster.